Today we're joined by lucky Louis Harman, lawyer, law lecturer, and author of The Last of the Magi, Symphony of Magic series. Well done, son.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's amazing to be back here again.
All right. Today's conversation essentially is going to be on freedom of speech, freedom of expression. Stick a pin in that for a minute.
We'll come to that.
So you've got 5 judges.
Yeah.
And 3 of them go one way, which becomes the leading opinion. Now it's law.
Yep.
And then you have two that go the other way. 2 judges go the other way. Now, it's easy when you read a piece of legislation or read a piece of law saying that's the law, right? These 2 people that went the other way are mountains, not to be ignored by mere folk like us.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't be ignored. But when you go through like a textbook of what is the law, what is the law, what is the law, that's the law.
The leading judgment is what prevails.
The leading judgment is what prevails. What I loved doing when I was studying was reading the dissenting opinion first. Read it first. Don't read it as this will add to my understanding broadly.
Mm-hmm.
Read the dissenting opinion first to be utterly convinced by it, because this is a mountain talking to you. You know, and you know, us mere mortals reading this mountain write to us about why this is not, why a telephone call can never be assault.
Yeah.
What, you know, the immediacy of harm or whatever it was. And you read it and you're like, it's fun. I, as a reasonably intelligent human being, can see no window for light in this argument. The man, this is perfect. Whatever the leading opinion is, must be wrong. Because this is perfect. It's immaculate. There's no space.
Yep.
Right? And then you're like, fine. Now I know my opinion. I know my mind. Let me read the leading opinion. And then you read, I'm sure it was Lord Stein, but it was beautifully written. Beautifully written. And you just read it and you're like, it's gorgeous. You know? And then it tells you a lot about yourself when you do things like that. When you go through exercises like that. It tells you a lot about yourself, about, you know, and I'm sure there's a way of actually describing the folly of certainty. You know, having a certainty about your opinion or your understanding. The arrogance that you think that you could understand the complexity of something. You know, the whole Dunning-Kruger effect.
I was just about to say, you're basically describing
But that whole thing, you know, and the more knowledge that you have, the humility that you see, and you're like, I see this in scholars. We see this in scholars, especially theology, which is, again, another great example where freedom of speech is just wild. Because the people with the least knowledge are the loudest, most aggressive, and most threatening, and most dangerous.
Yes.
And yet, when you get to the scholars, like, they can all be in the same room. Forget people of completely different faiths. They're scholars, can sit in the same room and humbly talk about, because their humility comes from an understanding, or at least a cursory understanding of the breadth
and the journey
of what they don't know.
Yes.
And they're like, we understand a drop in the ocean of what it means.
It's that known unknowns and unknown unknowns, isn't it? It's the people at the higher end of study and knowledge that know, usually, what it is they're missing from their knowledge that perhaps makes them more humble about it. Whereas as if you take it back to the Dunning-Kruger stuff, the biggest problem there is usually the person who is that loud voice, the person who's willing to just articulate whatever they say as if it's truth, doesn't know the big gap in their knowledge because they've not looked for it, or they've just turned a blind eye to it. Mm-hmm. And we see that a lot in society now, though, don't we? Just the amount of people who are willing to form a quick opinion on something and then snap into the mindset of, I'm right, everyone else is wrong, and because I've read this thing, I've understood this bit, I'm incontrovertibly correct. And then there'll be the people who know the bigger picture sat back who will be quietly thinking, probably sometimes, have I misunderstood? Am I missing something? Even though they actually know a lot more, but will keep quiet about it. It's a strange phenomenon, but it is what it is.
So when we talk about freedom of speech, just in the UK context, what is it that we're talking about? Let's define parameters here. What are we talking about?
if we mean it from a legal definition perspective, I mean, I would say that that's not my specialism.
Mm-hmm.
But from my perspective, when I have conversations about freedom of speech with people, I'm fundamentally just thinking about the idea that everyone should have the freedom to voice their opinions, to voice their points of view and their perspectives, free from undue persecution for it.
Undue persecution from whom?
From the people that disagree or feel that it's incorrect from their perspective.
So the legal context, if we just keep it there for a moment, is freedom from persecution from the government, right?
In terms of human rights side of it.
And then in the private space, almost none. Almost no protection.
Well, then that's where we get into I forgot what it was called now. Was it Section 5 of the Public Order Act or something, where you're not allowed to offend or humiliate someone? There was that big controversy. It probably wasn't Section 5. I can't remember the section now, but I remember Rowan Atkinson was a big proponent of this, saying we can't have legislation that says you cannot offend or you cannot humiliate, because that's in the gift of the recipient, and they can easily decide that what someone else has said is not worthy of being said out loud, and that's terrifying, because then you're shutting down the conversation.
Yeah.
That's actually my bigger interest in the freedom of speech part, is rather than defining it from that end, what can people say? I'm more interested in the other side of people shouldn't have the ability to shut down the conversation, because that stops us all from learning.
Yes. So you have freedom of speech in the legal context, which is necessarily curbed in in areas like incitement to violence, in the things like the Official Secrets Act, in areas where you're talking about, and obviously this is society specific, and so will evolve and has evolved, censorship. The protection of minors in particular.
Yeah.
So those are necessary, or at least deemed for the time being, necessary curbs on freedom of speech, freedom of expression. And they're legal. You also have the whole issue of protection from harm, which is problematic for obvious reasons, which is why Russia, I believe, after the Second World War, when they were doing the International Convention on Human Rights or something like that, one of those things. And they were talking about you have to stop the incitement of violence following from the Nazis. And there was a proposal, I think, by Russia to include protection from harm.
Okay.
And the opposition party said, oh, that sounds a lot like a tool that will be used to suppress dissent.
Yeah.
Right? Which is the problem. But anyway, so put the legal context to one side, because it's, for the most part, defined-ish, but has some kind of framework and enforcement and all the rest of it, and it works quite well. And also things like slander, also defamation, right? Move it into the public space, right, where it's actually where you probably come alive.
Yeah.
But now we have real problems, because now you have the marketplace, the social media marketplace, that world. Now, you go, freedom of expression in the marketplace. You say more things.
I say more things. Well, I mean, if we look at the social media side of it, I think that's particularly interesting. This is something I used to say to students when they come onto campus for an experience day at university. I talk to them about people like your Jordan Petersons, your Andrew Tates, your Ben Shapiros, your Katie Hopkins, who will often say things on social media or in the public that many people would find offensive or degrading or humiliating or offensive. And, okay, some of that is performative.
Mm-hmm.
Probably most of it is performative.
Mm-hmm.
It's about monetization. But behind it, there is often a body of opinion that some people subscribe to. And that's why they get so much traction. And it's quite often funny when you speak to students about it, and many times their initial stance on it is these people need to be cancelled.
Mm-hmm.
They need to be deplatformed, I suppose the university version of cancellation. And we just need to not give these people the time of day. And if you take Trump and other big political names as a different echelon of that example, what do we see as a result of that? Well, we see those people starting new platforms so that they can pull all these views together in a kind of deregulated space, and it starts to generate a more vicious cycle of commentary. And I think part of the problem there is that when you cancel, when you deplatform, when you try to block and debar people from the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
it has more of a negative impact, I think, for everyone. Actually, you've got the negative impact of what I've just said about it starts to create these new little echo chambers
Mm-hmm.
of people that become more extreme. No, what's the word? They become perhaps more extremist in their viewpoints and draw in people of a similar mindset where they think and talk about is that one particular perspective. But also for the rest of us, arguably it puts the rest of us in a safer space. But again, it's an echo chamber safer space where we're all hearing viewpoints that we broadly agree with each other, and we lose the opportunity to be challenged and to challenge and to, coming back to the thing about the judgments, to see the dissenting view or the alternative view that perhaps was never on our radar.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the fear that I have about freedom of speech or freedom of expression to some extent, that the conversation channel should be kept open, even though we will see and hear some outrageous, offensive things from people. I think it's so important to see that happening so that we can form our views on it.
Do you think, well, you don't, I don't, well, do you think it should be absolute then?
I would never say yes to that. As lawyers, there's going to, as coming back to the Dunning-Kruger stuff, I know there's stuff that I won't have considered.
Mm-hmm.
So there's, looking at the current legal protections we have, we talked about the incitement of violence, the slander, the libel, the protection from certain types of harassment. There's already some safeguards in place. No doubt there will need to be more.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in order to identify what safeguards we need, we at least need to keep everything else in the open space. Yes, you can say everything else unless the law has already figured out, no, that's a line that you've crossed. So things like what you're saying about the protection of minors, I mean, that's an obvious and major one.
Mm-hmm.
That there's certain things that should never be put before people of a particular young age or said to someone of that kind of age for various reasons. We don't need to go into it.
Mm-hmm.
But we've established that over time.
Mm-hmm.
And there will be other things like that that perhaps we haven't considered yet. And I dare say the discussions over the trans community and pronouns and wokeness and stuff like that, that's something that the law doesn't quite yet know what to deal with. But we need to keep having those conversations so we can figure out where we need to get to, rather than say, well, we need to cancel and block everyone who has a certain point of view and only platform those who have this type of view that we seem as morally or socially acceptable. Because we need to figure these things out.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we don't, then there won't be any call for the legal protections.
So then we're going to chop and change here. I mean, I suppose this is it's actually too broad a topic to actually cover in one day anyway. So let's just jump about
go for it.
For a laugh. So using the trans community as an example then. So words to incite violence, thing one. Words that could incite harm or could cause harm, thing two. Put those to one side. The definition of violence, pretty much up until very, very recently, was quite easily understood. now words are violence. Do you see a problem with that evolution, that leap?
Yeah, and it's the same about the idea of a microaggression. I don't really hear that expression being used as much anymore, but people would say what you have just said is a form of aggression or it is a form of violence. And I don't see that in that way. I really struggle with that because I think when we're talking about, if we're talking specifically about someone voicing an opinion or a point of view, which is fundamentally, perhaps from an ideological perspective or an identity perspective, completely contrary to ourselves, our views or our identity, I think you hit a crossroads at that point where you choose, and I know it's a bit of a controversial thing to say sometimes, but you choose, do I say that I'm offended by that and say, you can't say that to me, I don't think you should be allowed to say that type of thing, so shut it down? Or do you say, it's interesting that you say that. Can you talk me through why you have that point of view? What's got you to that stage so I can understand it? I can see what perhaps would lead you to get to that point so I can better understand why someone would have that type of view or would say that type of thing. Might help me know more about my position, helps me empathize with someone else's point of view. And then hopefully, usually, if you have that kind of conversation in the way that I've just framed it, usually the person on the other side is more open to then have the conversation back with you, where you both start off at perhaps diametrically opposed positions. And it's a bit like mediation and negotiation, isn't it? You're slowly bringing the hands together so that both sides can find a common ground. But if we take the view that words and their meaning inherently can be violent, again, detaching this from inciting violence, just saying the words and their meaning in themselves are violent, then you might as well just say, well, you and I who disagree, let's not ever speak to each other. And now let's draw a line, and we're enemies on either side of that line.
And now what we've also done then is stopped one of the fundamental reasons that freedom of speech is so damn important. Is we've actually now stopped that because now we can't talk our problems out. So now the only thing left is for us to fight our problems out, which is a real problem. Because on top of the fact that it'll build resentment and frustration and isolationism and the silo echo chambers and all the rest of it, I now don't have an opportunity to talk my way out of it.
That's just made me think of another thing though that I think is quite tricky. There's a lot of social media influencers or brands and platforms out there that again, a bit like some of the names I mentioned earlier on, brand themselves as the supporters of freedom of speech. And they promote, I want us to have conversations and to be able to debate until the world's end. But there's also, I think, a growing crowd of those types of people who now are using freedom of speech as their brand when all they want to do is be seen to win. I don't know, I'm developing this as I'm saying it, but it's the gotcha thing where you can watch some of these YouTube channels where people are debating and it's always about, I'm going to use freedom of speech to make you look like an idiot. I'm going to look like the clever one because I'm good at debating. And I'm just going to use
thinking about Ben Shapiro.
No, to be fair.
Sam Harris, unfortunately, he was a very good proponent of freedom of speech until very recently. Both of them did the same thing, pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, I think more recently Ben Shapiro has mellowed out a bit on that side. I think he's been behaving himself a bit more in that respect. But often to be fair, let's just.
Didn't he just recently fire Candace Owens?
I don't know.
Yeah, he fired Candace Owens for her speaking out about the Middle East issue.
Ah, okay. But then, so there's that side of it where then freedom of speech becomes, again, not about learning each other's point of view and trying to understand it and trying to support each other so that both sides come out more enriched with knowledge and understanding than they were before. It becomes, I'm the clever one. I'm going to tell you why you're wrong, and then we'll have a fight. But at least we could have that fight in public. And I think that starts to brand freedom of speech, though it is still promoting it, portrays it as something quite negative, actually.
Yeah, seems quite unpleasant rather
is
than something
unpleasant.
to be lauded.
It's tricky, isn't it? It's really tricky.
Yes, because like how involved do you get in the public space? That's another problem. I mean, enforcement, forget the problem with enforcement, but like I'm a private business. I own my own media company. And to what extent is the government going to get involved in what I can and cannot say? Is it a free press or isn't it? Am I allowed to say what I want to say? Well, I say this obtuse thing, right? I support this obtuse thing. It's not it doesn't have to be independent. It has to be impartial. All right? You can't get involved. Government can't get involved in me. But that doesn't mean I can't have a pro-X or a pro-Y stance. Well, there's a problem with that, though, because I am forming public opinion. I'm part of what forms public opinion. Not just that. When you look at social media, I'm now part of what shouts down other opinion. But that's freedom of speech. My shouting down someone's opinion is freedom of speech. But if somebody has a pro-X point of view, well, Y is now going to shout at you, swear at you, call you a and put your IP address and your children's school address online. You're like, huh? What just happened here? You've just threatened my whole family because I have a perspective. Well, it's not just coming from one place, though, because if a pro-Y person puts out an opinion, the from the pro-X camp are now going to do the same thing to you. And you're like, what? So now, terrifyingly, I'll give you an example. If somebody puts out an Islamist point of view, right, or an Islamic point of view, let's just forget these, because the Islamist thing comes with its own, negative connotation because it's defined by its the negative elements. But if somebody puts a pro-Islamic point of view, you will have lunatics from other groups shouting that down, and then this guy's response is Islamophobia, right, which is in that case perhaps true. But you also have in that camp that will challenge a normal question or just shut down that with Islamophobia. So now the concept of Islamophobia is now blurred, right? Similarly, anti-Semitism, right? There is a real problem with anti-Semitism, right? And always has been since 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? But that phrase is now also used to shut down actual criticism of governments. But anyway, point is this. You've got this guy that says one thing, he gets shouted at and sworn at by different groups. You've got a Jewish community that puts out something, they get shouted down. You've got the Christian community. So now instead of having one or two perfectly small, marginalized groups who you could step on and stomp on, now everybody feels marginalized at the same time. So now everybody feels marginalized. Everybody's also feeling like, I can't say what I want to say anymore because I don't want to get shouted at and sworn at.
Yep.
So self-censorship is happening, but everybody's doing it. So now everybody's frustrated. Nobody's talking. You're like, it's going to turn into one big bun fight. That doesn't sound like a good plan.
No, it isn't. It absolutely isn't. I wish there was an easy answer to
And
it.
that was, I was only talking about religion.
Yeah.
But now, what about feminism? What about the LGBTQ plus communities? Every tiny little categorization that you can come up with is now feeling marginalized. Because if they speak out, even if they say something innocuous, some troll somewhere is going to off.
But even the people who perhaps are part of what would be a non-marginalized group, what's the opposite of a marginalized group? The majority.
Yeah, why not?
That seems like that's not the antonym, but never mind. The rest of society. But even they feel the same too. Because they can't.
Well, that's why Jordan Peterson's doing so well. He's doing of middle class males. And you're like, hold on a minute. I thought they were in power. What happened to the patriarchy? I thought we were running things.
It's the same why we saw and why we have seen what we've seen with Andrew Tate. That a lot of people say, well, he's saying the things that most of us don't feel like we can say out loud. I'm not saying that that's true, but for the people that follow, He's saying things out loud that no one else dares to say, and that resonates with some people, particularly if you're someone that feels like you've not been able to communicate for a long time. That is, like I said right at the very beginning, that then becomes immensely attractive. Whereas if we could find a way to stop people feeling like their views and their opinions are suppressed, then we wouldn't. I don't think we would see people being drawn to those types of characters.
Yes, I see that. How do you do that then?
I don't know.
No.
I don't.
This is
know.
a solution-based podcast.
Is it?
Oh yeah,
damn,
we're all
I'll
about
have to leave.
solutions. We come out with answers here.
I mean, the only thing I can think of is it's all. The only thing I can really say is that we enforce the freedom to have these views expressed and
how
posted.
do you enforce the freedom to express these views? So what I'm talking about in the public sphere now, in the marketplace
Yes,
or wherever they call it, the town square. How do you enforce freedom of speech without at the same time curbing freedom of speech? Because it's not the government that's stopping people from talking anymore. It's not, or
It's
at
us.
least not openly.
It's society. It's
It's
culture.
society. It's groups shutting each other down, like trolling each other for a laugh, for likes, for views. It's groups, and it's virtue signaling from everybody at the same time. Just
I'll tell you what. I've got an idea.
go.
This may seem a bit silly, but I actually think part of the solution is just like we're seeing now, where particularly over the last few years, especially I think, or maybe the last 10 years perhaps, the vogue has been being controversial online, or being the loudest voice, and virtue signaling, shutting other people down and monetizing that. I think the starting point based on today's society is to have things like this, where people are able to have, or are encouraged to have, those open conversations in a really sensible, calm, academic way, but not trying to make that sound boring. You know what I mean? Where you explore it. And a part of that might be, well, let's either having two people who have a conversation where they disagree, and they just are allowed to explore that, but they're just cautious about how they do that with each other. Where the people who are at the table agree that even if I think someone has just said something fundamentally offensive and I completely abhorrently disagree with it, I'm going to talk to them about it rather than immediately going, I need to shut down that conversation. And I think a lot of people would see that as being attractive, because it's not the sensationalized version that we see through influencers. And if just a few people were able to do that and make that work, I think you could slowly start to build a trend where the new trend on platforms is people actually just having the conversation, being allowed to do it. I mean, I listen to a lot of LBC radio. I love LBC radio. I don't know if you listen to it.
At the moment, yeah, they've been really
kicking off in the
yeah.
last few years, and I was on it recently talking about AI very briefly. But one of the things I love about that is someone can phone up and have a viewpoint that the host fundamentally disagrees with. And okay, there is a little bit of talking over each other and shutting each other down a little bit, but more or less the opinion gets expressed and it may be challenged. It's not shut down, but it is challenged, and it's challenged both ways. I mean, the hosts on there are pretty savvy at what they do. They've got their jobs for the reasons that they do. They know how to more or less win the argument, but they don't do it in a, well, how do I express it? They're not doing it maliciously, I don't think, from what I hear. It's usually, I need to understand your view so I can explain why my view is perhaps the correct one and you should follow it. And it feels like it's a more intellectually charged conversation rather than a sensationally charged conversation. And I'm really attracted to that. And I quite often listen to some of the best bits of various shows over the years where people are expressing the controversial views. And I do the same for your Ben Shapiro's, your Jordan Petersons, your Katie Hopkins. I love to hear their most controversial viewpoints, not because I agree with them, not because I think that they're right, but I want to know what that other viewpoint is. I need to know it.
It's too important.
It is important.
You do need to know it. So what do you do about media for likes and social and ratings and all the rest of it? But this whole thing about sensationalizing trivial things, but it's the thing that's most interesting. So if an event happens and it's, this is the event and this is the boring part of this part of the event. That's the part that's talked about and shared and retweeted and liked and and it seems like that's what's happened. So I don't know what an objective viewpoint is anymore, because I have no way of accessing what actually happened. Because I wasn't there, and the only information I have is the sensational horse shit, and all I know about is this.
To give you an example of that, I haven't been following the story that closely, but there's very recently been that controversy over, was it a Jewish man in London, I think, who was attending a protest? I can't remember the full details, so I'll apologise that I may get this completely wrong, but the spirit of it is the important thing. He was at a protest and the police tried to intervene, saying because this man was, as they described, visibly Jewish, he was a risk. There was a risk to him being there at that particular protest march. And so, trying to look at it from both sides, someone was attending something, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, all that kind of stuff. Fine. Police trying to do their job of protecting people from harm. Okay, we've got a little clash there. All that's being said about it is the police have done something hideous and tried to pull someone out of a protest. And the whole point of, no one's talking about the protest, what happened there, what it was there for, the full details of it, who was there, what they were there for. It's just all become about this one little thing and how controversial it was. And there's been arguments made saying, well, perhaps the video recordings and the sound recordings that have been circulating of this police intervention were filmed deliberately to then become sensationalized online to generate attention. And again, that then becomes the focus, and we've lost all meaning of everything that happened here. It just becomes about police brutality. And I don't think anyone involved in the protest or this particular incident ever wanted it to be about that. The message is gone. We're just back to branding who's the villain here and who isn't, and the conversation is dead.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the point there I was trying to get to, and it might not have been the best way of getting there, but it's like you say, the one controversial little thing that was there is now all that matters. It's a bit like back when Theresa May was PM, and you think back on some of the most notable things that happened during her tenure, and people spend a lot of time talking about the silly things, like the dance that she did on the way onto the stage, and was it one of her press conferences where the lettering on the wall behind her started falling down? No one cares what she was talking about, her points of view, and whether or not they were right or wrong. It's all about, let's just sensationalize the things that were going on around her, ridicule, troll, and use that to form our opinion of who's right and who's wrong about things. And actually, there's no discussion about the substance. It's gone. It's just gone. Because that's not what generates the clicks and the likes. It's what's the funniest thing that we can put on social media that'll become a meme moments. And we're just shutting down the conversation every time. It's a shame. Do you have a fix in mind for how we normalize conversation again? Throwing your question back at you now.
Mate, I brought you in to give me the solution. No,
Yeah.
Do I? Not really. I think the reality is that people do have a responsibility, perhaps, to say the right thing, to do the right thing, to speak truth to power. I think that those things have always been true, and they're more true now than they ever have been. I think if media groups want to sensationalize things for whatever reason they have, then maybe if you don't like that, maybe you have an obligation to set up your own media group or your own, communication channels that don't do that, that do try to report things in a balanced way. I think if you're on a university campus and you don't like a particular viewpoint, I think you're obliged not to shut it down by deplatforming them, but respond to it. If it's wrong, tell me why it's wrong, and be coherent. Maybe do that and see how you get on. But then you come across problems like, is that absolute? And if it isn't absolute, why isn't it absolute? What about incitement to violence? Okay. What if they're not inciting violence? So here's an uncomfortable question. If we can use the Nazis as an example, right? Because everybody already hates them. So, and that's consigned to history. You're like, that's a hateable group. Cool. Right. So that's fine. So using them as an example, are they allowed to come onto a university campus? The answer immediately is no, right? Almost everybody would say no, you can't have that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the response then is, what if they're not inciting violence in their conversation? What if all they're doing is presenting their philosophy? You're like, well, your philosophy, when it played out, was pretty horrific. I just want to talk about why. And then from a university's point of view, you're like, okay, now I didn't want to say any of this stuff out loud, but most of the kids we've got here are and they're really easily manipulated. I mean, they're communists until the day they earn their first pound, and then they're conservative as you like. They're as capitalist as you like. But while they're here, they are dumb. What are we going to do about this? Because we can't have these people come on, because they'll manipulate 20% at least. We're going to lose 20% to the Nazis. That's why they say, no, you can't come on.
See, I think that does a bit of a disservice, because I don't think that would ever have that extreme of an effect. But that's the concern that institutions want to safeguard against.
I mean, that's a very brave thing to say, considering they had people in the streets marching, and they had a whole country. And, every now and again you get a couple of nutters in this country, and they'll say something mental, and they'll fill the streets. You're like, hold on a minute, babe, should we go back inside the house? It's a bit scary out there, apparently, according to the telly. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I get that. But I mean, if we're talking about people expressing their views, let's stick with the campus example. People expressing their views, where you've got a huge range of people who express their views, which means people can come on and then express views that contradict the views they've heard before, to try and challenge and get people to think another way. I don't think that would have quite that level. I mean, I don't know how, if we stick with the Nazi example, I don't quite know the history of how that built up over time, and to what extent that was because of a nationwide promulgation of views, or if it was something tiny that just really slowly, incrementally grew up. I don't know, but I don't know my history as well on that kind of thing. But I don't think it's as much of a concern in that sense, because my stance on that type of thing is, I want to hear it. I want to hear it, and I don't care what it is. You want to hear it,
and I want to hear it, but we're already safe from. We would consider ourselves already safe. What do you do about stupid people?
No, I get what you mean. Those who are more susceptible to influence, not necessarily in a bad way.
Yeah, the Dunning-Kruger chart, the people on this side of it, where they just go, they hear one thing and they go, "Oh my God, that must be altogether true," and I know everything about it now.
But just before we go to that, so our university, we had a speaker. I can't remember who it was or precisely when it was, but there was talk of someone coming onto campus to deliver a particular type of talk. It was a completely non-controversial subject. It was a really helpful and informative subject. It was just an educational subject. But this person in question had, in the past, expressed certain views that people found offensive.
Mm-hmm.
But that was completely detached from the subject matter of the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
That turned into a whole, we need to shut that down because we can't have someone like that
Mm-hmm.
who has those views given a platform here. And to me, when I hear that said out loud, I think that makes zero sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Why should I? So if someone was, as a member of the LGBT community, if someone was coming onto the university campus to teach me about the leading pedagogical techniques, things that will enhance our teaching for all of our students, for the betterment of our students, but they were also an absolute homophobe,
Mm-hmm.
and unquestionably so.
Mm-hmm.
If their knowledge on the other subject is valuable, I wouldn't want to shut that down.
Okay, let's stick with that topic.
Mm.
What if they were coming onto campus to talk about what they perceive to be the problems with the LGBTQ community, and but they weren't inciting violence? They might be inciting hatred.
Mm. Well, it depends, doesn't it? If they're
But
coming on campus,
their views were very Nazi, very
Sure.
right wing, very
sure,
you know.
okay.
I believe you should be tied to a goat and thrown off a church. That kind of view.
Mm-hmm.
Well, can they come onto the campus? Should they come onto the campus? Because we can't ignore stupid people, and there are stupid people in the university space. Forget the university. I mean, the university campus is problematic because it should be a hub of learning. It should be a place where all ideas, even the wildest, should be presented. This isn't the same as primary school or even secondary school. This is a university. I should be able to touch every piece of knowledge there, right? And so I definitely see your problem with the university campus. But talk about it anyway. What do you think?
So
You
with
would
that
say yes.
example, I would say yes, because I want to know
Okay.
why.
Okay, so now this person's come on.
Mm.
Now they're buggered off. Now you've got a group of people that have been influenced by them, and they've formed a community. Now what do you do about those students? Because now they're going around in their little freedom of assembly concept, and they've got placards, and they're just making life shit for everyone. Well, bleep that, but you know what I mean? And they're and now everyone's miserable.
Yeah.
Or you've got people saying, anti Jewish sentiment, and you've got these poor little Jewish kids trying to go to school, trying to go to university, and they're like, what? I don't want to feel like a piece of shit. Or like, some Islamic phobic stuff or some anti-black stuff. You know what I mean? Anything.
Yeah.
But now what do you do about freedom of assembly and freedom of speech? Forget bringing somebody in to talk. Because let's you and I agree that should always be allowed.
Okay.
Right. What do you do about these
So we've got some activist activity, effectively, is the scenario we're looking at now. Again, just as a gut reaction, I don't necessarily want to try and regulate it, because I think to some extent, if I've got someone campaigning a particular point of view, I think the contrary viewpoints, the people that would oppose it, would, well, in my ideal world, would come out to challenge it. It's a bit like when you go down a high street and you see a street preacher who perhaps is saying something that to the everyday average person walking past sounds antagonistic towards a certain group. It's quite often the LGBT community, to be fair, and the subject of sin. And the amount of times I see, particularly young people, actually, college students or high school students who are out at lunch, and they stop and they try to have the conversation, not abusively, actually. I've stopped and listened to some of these conversations before. Just listen to a young person say, why are you saying that? That's really offensive. And then they have the conversation. And I think that's valuable, because then other people can learn from it. Because the alternative is, if you don't let those people be the activists in public, to be, yes, okay, they might convert some people to their point of view, but they're probably going to affect the majority of people who are going to say, well, I'd never want to be even closely affiliated with those people.
Okay, here's the problem though. What about a harmonious society, right? Or a harmonious community? Because I want to go to university. I want to engage in this wonderful sort of romantic notion of being able to sit under a tree, read a book, engage in conversation. And what I don't want is placards and shouting and swearing. I don't want to, but if we don't regulate anything, then the loudest always wins. The loudest always gets louder. And the quieter, the serenity just ends up getting trampled on. So either I have to get louder in order to...
Louder in your serenity. No, see, I think there's a problem with that.
So how do I balance one right against the other need, almost?
Just taking your little serene, harmonious society idea for a moment. This may be looking at it a bit superficially, but I feel like the placards, the noise, the protest is because usually the people who are protesting or are out with the placards and signs feel they're not being listened to, feel that they have the viewpoint that can't be heard or is being ignored, and it's the lack of the harmonious society that's causing that to happen. Whereas I think in your idyllic scenario, I don't think there would be people doing that. Is my starting point. But going now to how do we balance the things with each other, I don't know how we balance it. I think the starting point, I think it may seem dramatic, but if the starting point is, yes, you can communicate, then I think there becomes inherently less of a need for people to be that active in a dramatic way. I'm not sure if I've not thought that through in enough depth yet in my mind, but I think the perceived limits on freedom of expression that some people will feel they experience is what drives them to the more extreme solution. Because if you're not listening, I'm going to be louder. And if you're not letting me speak, I'm going to stand and protest, and I'm going to campaign for whatever, and I'm going to try and get people to join my cause. But when people are already free to express, be heard, and have the conversation, I think to some extent people just feeling like they were allowed to say what they want to say and to be heard and to be treated respectfully for it, I think that solves a lot of the problem. And again, I'm talking hypothetically because we don't have that in society really, so I can't say what I'm saying now is true. But that's my gut instinct. I've had this situation at university before where I had a student in one of my classes who was very quiet, quite timid. I got talking to him after a couple of seminars, and he would stick around after our class. He would eventually just start to express some of his personal views to me, whether it's political, whether it's to do with society, morality, and ethics. We had some really, really intense conversation. I think if anyone else overheard them, they'd have thought our conversation was probably something that shouldn't have happened. But from my perspective, I was platforming him, saying, you tell me whatever it is that's on your mind, whatever your viewpoints are, I'm going to ask you some questions about them, as you like to do, and I'm going to throw some other things your way. And I could tell from the conversations as time went on that he felt liberated. And again, this is my interpretation, but from the way I interacted with him over the course of the year, I felt like he got a lot out of just being able to say, that's what I think. And I know people won't like it, but that's what I think. And I thought, you know what? You are right to have that viewpoint. I don't agree with that one and that one, but I'm glad you told me it because I learned some stuff along the way. And we did talk about some quite heavy stuff, some quite heavy controversial stuff, which I know that if he was having a conversation with people in his peer group, they would have attacked him for it because
the virtue signaling thing would have just happened immediately.
And it's not necessarily virtue signaling all the time. Sometimes it's just, sometimes with some of these viewpoints that he was talking about, you can really struggle to get into the substance of the argument because the moment you start to introduce the topic, people immediately think you're about to tell me something you're an idiot, and I don't want to have that conversation, and you're wrong immediately. And then there it's gone, it's died. You can't have the conversation, which means he has to then go off and stew on it by himself. And perhaps his views will become more extreme and radical over time as a result. But being able to just have the conversation, I think, helps. It's all hypothetical. course. But I would love it. I would love to see. I'll tell you what's a good thing, a good one actually. It's just reminded me, a YouTube series. Is it called Middle Ground? You probably know what I'm talking about. I can't. It might not be called Middle Ground, but in my brain it's called Middle Ground. It's where they get people on diametrically opposed points of view on a subject, and they stand at the back of a room, and they get asked a question, which is usually a controversial question on the subject of choice. And if they've got a view on it, or they agree or disagree with the question, they come into the middle, they express why they agree or disagree with the subject, and then they have a back and forth. And the people on the outside aren't allowed to contribute until they're willing to step in and feel comfortable to have the conversation. But there's kind of an unspoken rule, but it's probably spoken before the thing starts, that the moment you sit in one of those seats and you're having that conversation, you listen to each other. You say what's on your mind. I'll have to send you a link if you haven't seen it before, because they've done some really controversial things about, trying to think of any of them now, but people who come from heavy faith families and those who are in atheist families, and trying to talk about the merits of raising children with faith, or things like certification for gender identity, and have people who have gone through that process on one side and those who are stoically against it on the other. And the point is, both sides were able to say, here's my concerns and here's my worries. And the amount of times someone sits there on one of the extreme sides of the conversation and goes, oh, I hadn't thought of that before. But now that you've said it, I see that. I still don't disagree with your point of view. Sorry, I still don't agree with your point of view. But I can understand now why that's a concern for you. And I think that's so important. And I think it's a bit like, take another extreme example, and then I'll shut up. If you take someone who's controversial in today's society, like J.K. Rowling and her views on the trans community, again, I don't want to keep coming back to the trans community, but because that's not fair. But unfortunately, in this phase of our society, that's probably one of the issues. I hate using the word issues, but one of the things in today's society people are struggling with a lot. There are people behind J.K. Rowling, particularly from what I've seen and heard, women who perhaps are cisgender women who are the victims of male perpetrated violence, who are terrified of this stuff because of the risk it could pose to them. And I've said to people before, those people are in their rights to be terrified because of their experiences, and their views and voices are allowed to be heard, but they wouldn't be allowed to say that out loud. You know, this is why I'm terrified, because someone else would say, clearly you're transphobic. So, well, no, listen to what they said. They've said they're a victim of something. That colours their view of the world. We need to unpack that or understand it, so we can go, okay, take that on board. What do we do as a result to make sure?
Yeah, but that's, I mean, so this is something that I don't quite understand, because when you're talking about, and like in this particular example, so this isn't necessarily, well, I suppose it is still freedom of speech, freedom of expression, but why isn't that what you just said obvious? Why isn't somebody that's vulnerable, that's come from a place of hurt, that says, there is a legitimate danger I'm frightened of, and I'm frightened of it because check this out.
Yeah.
Why is that like, no, shut up. You're like, why isn't that? Yes, obviously that's something we have to consider. Why isn't, yes, obviously that's something we have to consider. Why isn't that the next step to that conversation?
I don't know. I mean, part of it, I think, is because there's often just a jump to the conclusion of you're trying to erase the other side.
See that, but that shuts down conversation. Like calling something transphobic immediately. Like if something is legitimately transphobic, then we can talk about it. But if you've got to do some sort of linguistic wrangling to get it there, maybe let's just err on the side of freedom of speech. You know, if something's obviously anti-Semitic or obviously Islamophobic, don't, you know, okay, we can see what's going on here. But if you've got to do some sort of acrobatics to get me there, that's not it. Let people talk. Let people debate. Let people share and think. Because if people have real frustrations and real fears, let them talk about it, man. Let's get it out in the open, and then legitimately get your way through it. If you're so what, then what does it come down to? I'm so scared of you being able to share your opinion and me not being able to convince enough people that your opinion was wrong. This is what it comes down to. I'm scared that I'm not able to convince enough people that your opinion was wrong. So if I can't do that, these people will believe you. Or I don't have the ability to amplify my opinion over your opinion. Your ability to amplify yourself is so much greater than mine. So therefore I have to speak louder, or I have to speak more assertively, or I have to shut you down quicker. That's what happens.
That makes sense. I mean, that comes back to your point earlier on about the people who are more susceptible to being influenced. If we've got a big player on one side, the big voice with the big reach, then yes, you do need to raise your voice to rebalance it, to make sure that the voices on the other side are being heard in equal volume and equal number, well, maybe in equal volume. But it's just, as we see, often rather than that becoming, I want to make this viewpoint, this counter viewpoint really heard, it turns into, I'm going to attack you. I'm going to tell you why you're the worst person on the earth. Like you said, post all of your personal details. And that's not the right way.
That's what happened to J.K. Rowling. They threatened her with rape and all sorts of madness. Poor girl.
And I'm not being an apologist for her, just to clarify that, because there's a lot of stuff out there that I do disagree with.
I don't know what she said, to be honest.
She says a lot of stuff.
But that bit about threatening her with rape and her kids and this, that, and the other, I was like, what the hell? What on earth did she say? I'm sure she didn't say that.
No, and equally, there's a lot that she has said and has done which someone needs to be saying, come on, think about this before you do this stuff. But equally, I look at those who fire back. I say fire back, sometimes it's just firing at. And I think no one's winning on this side. All you're doing is painting both sides as idiotic. And we're losing the point. That's why we're no steps forward, really, to solving the problem, because it's just a fire pit.
Yeah, it's not conversation. It's not a debate. It's not a discussion and a sharing of ideas and a moving forward.
And this has just made me think, actually, because going back to the solution, something that I do, and I do this quite regularly, I think, is when I'm having a conversation with someone, particularly if I don't know their points of view on something, but I'm really interested in their points of view, because I just think they've got interesting opinions, or they've got something valuable to say. A bit like how we've gone from trigger warnings, which have now slowly shifted into content warnings and disclaimers on things. I think the next progression of that in the right direction, rather than saying, careful, you might want to stay away from this content for this reason, is instead saying, by the way, what's about to come is a really open, honest and transparent conversation. Nothing in this is intended to be, or designed to be offensive or hurtful. It is purely freedom of expression.
But you and I did this. We had this conversation about 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And I said that when we were talking about setting up a podcast, and I said I wanted to create a space where people could share. So there's two things I want to talk about from there. You've got cancel culture, and you've got shadow bans, right? Because even in this conversation about freedom of speech, freedom of expression, right, we should be able to say whatever we want. We should be able to talk about whatever we want to talk about. The trouble is that the platforms that we're using are private companies. Private companies have by and large the freedom to do what they want. Yep. They can set whatever policies they like, whatever content they want to put out there. So then you have this concept called shadow banning, that if we discuss something or discuss the way something's happening, we will get...
It's conveniently knocked out of the algorithm.
Completely knocked out of the algorithm or demoted. And you're like, well, then I won't talk about it. Or if I'm, a university lecturer or a Christian preacher, say, and I've got issues with the Christian church, or I've got issues with if I talk about those things, I'll get hoofed out. Or if I'm a conservative politician and I say things that I don't agree with your man there, Rishi, and his master plan, I'll get a whip across my head and kicked out of the... You're like, hold on a minute. There are a lot of societal controls that stop me from saying what I want to say. Like I suppose you're in a better position because you openly advocate for what you believe to be truth and justice. But you're the LGBTQ lead at the university, right?
For the law school, yeah.
For the law school. So are there a bunch of different schools that have different leads? Do you all get together and go, how are you getting on?
We don't meet collectively. I mean, there is an LGBT network at the university, but in theory, yes, each school, so each subject school within the university has champions, as we currently call them.
But are you comfortable? Would you feel comfortable criticizing the LGBTQ community and the way that they've been handling discourse? I suppose you'd be doing that internally anyway. I would have imagined.
When you say internally, in the
university? In the university and to the community, saying, look, what's with terrifying people? Don't do it that way around.
I mean, I think the starting point to that is, yes, I certainly would be prepared to stand against certain things. I can think of a couple of examples in not too distant years where I thought, guys, this is detrimental to the cause. Mm-hmm. This conversation's gone nuclear when it shouldn't have done. But honestly, coming back to the self-censorship idea, I'm not the person that wants to lead that discussion or even necessarily be the kind of voice along the front lines of it. That's just not the way I am. I much prefer to sit back and watch all of it and try and work out for myself what's the truth. Mm-hmm. Which I've often described myself as a very neutral person. That often means that I don't take much of a stance on anything, to be honest. This is probably one subject that I do take a stance on because it aligns with my lifestyle. Mm-hmm. I watch people have debates and I listen to topical and controversial opinions. I very rarely have a specific view either way. I want to know it all. I want to see it all. Mm-hmm. And usually it keeps me in that neutral middle ground to some extent, but at least I feel like I know what the flaws and the strengths are on either side that keep me where I am. So just trying to get to the point of your question, I do feel like I would stand against stuff that even my own community would.
My own community. Does it bother you to say that out loud? To pick a community?
Yeah, I don't like. I mean, I've never really been part of LGBT groups. I do the LGBT champion at work because I want to be clear that if anyone ever needed support based on that, then I'm a pair of ears that will listen and I'll offer a help and support where I can. But I'm not interested in it from the kind of activism side.
Yeah, but just like I mean,
it's a very small part of who I am.
Yeah, it's just I never and it's not how I identify myself. No. Like, when you hear people talk, and God bless them, there's not a criticism, even though it might sound like it. When people say "my people," you're like, and they're talking about their particular race, and you're like, what? I can't go into my own house and not fight. Talk about your whole people. You've got a whole people. I mean, well done, but what are you talking about? You know what I mean? Like, my people, my group, my I'm like, what category are you going to try and slot me into? Like,
when I was going through the book querying stuff, when I wanted to pursue mainstream publishing, traditional publishing, which I pursued for close to 2 years, I found so many literary agents that said they're really interested in hearing from LGBT writers. And I read that and thought, not a particular story, just someone who writes that's within that community. And at first I was like, I might have a way in. It's easier for me. But then very quickly went, wait, no. So that means if I get asked for a full manuscript request, there's a chance that I'm only being offered that because of being a bisexual man. I was like, well, that's wrong. In my brain, that's just hideously wrong to me. Because it made me think, if I got through that, I'm then the person on your list that ticks your diversity box. No. And and I don't want to be
And
part of that.
so that, I mean, that, and that's one aspect of it, that one that I didn't get there 100% on merit, or there's a risk that I couldn't get there 100%. But then the other thing is that don't put me in a box. Don't put me, I don't want, no label. I'm not interested in your label, you know? Let's definitely do this again. What I do want to talk about is your book.
It makes me so happy.
Tell me more things. Where is it? Let's see.
It's I've had it tucked down my side the whole time. How weird is that? So I talked about this last time, didn't I? The funny thing is, when I talked to you about this last time, I can't remember when that was now in the grand passage of time.
Oh, that's beautiful.
But that was not even on my radar. I, over the Easter break, spent a 2-week period taking all the work that I'd done for years on that and thought, you know what? I'm just going to try. I'm going to give it a go. And then within 2 weeks, I'd gotten a print copy and an ebook made up, and it makes it sound like I produced an entire book in 2 weeks. I didn't. The words were there for years, but I just had them hidden away as my own little private thing. And a few people read it, some beta readers, and they seemed to enjoy it. And I thought, if I just put no expectation on myself, but just do something as a project of love, as something that I love to do, then let's just do it. But as I think most people who write fantasy and epic fantasy probably feel the same, trying to describe it is quite hard. It's particularly hard for me because there's 3 levels to it, depending on. I've said to people, depending on what type of fan you are of fiction and fantasy, I'd give you a different description of it. But the 3, to go through them quickly, as a kind of the pitch. The story of that book, so it's Last of the Magi, which is the first book in the Symphony of Magics series that I've created, which I'm about three books into in terms of what I've written. The story of this is quite a classic group of oppressed characters who try to overthrow evil empire. You know, that kind of classic storyline. But the idea is the main character, Tharian, used to live in a particular country. The country has become oppressed and under the control of a particular society that has developed a monopoly over a kind of magic that's called arcana, to the point that they have committed an act of genocide and killed all other magic users in the country who used capital M magic. So our magic is gone, arcana now rules. Tharian, the main character, spent 10 years away looking for some way to overthrow this arcana. And he comes back after 10 years with something that he thinks will work. He's heard a rumor that one magi still lives in his country, is still living, is still out there, and has a power at their disposal that can stop arcana. And Tharian is a reckless renegade fugitive. He's been a one-man army his whole life. He's done everything his own way. He's kept away from society, and he's got to learn, how can I overthrow effectively a mega city and a society on my own? He can't. How am I going to learn to actually pull people together to liberate my country? So he's got to overcome the challenges of his own instincts to do that. So a lot of the story is about how he is going to pull together friends and learn to work with others. There's 3 perspective characters. There's Tharian, who is our fugitive, our renegade, who is trying to lead this uprising. We also follow Marla, who is a young blacksmithing apprentice. She loses basically her entire world in the very beginning of the book, so it's not a spoiler. But rather than knowing that was always potentially going to happen because of the Arcana users, the Grand City of Elheim, she decides to start a new life for herself. She's going to be something bigger and better than she ever was before, and she gets embroiled in Tharian's campaign as a result of that. And the 3rd perspective is Darius Valavel, one of my favourite characters that I've ever come up with, who is on the other side. He's on the Elheim side. He's an Arcana user. He's born into a society that he doesn't belong to. He doesn't feel the same as everyone else around him. He doesn't know how to line up his identity, his values, and his behavior styles against everyone else around him who's fundamentally different and is pursuing different goals. So the story is about those three. So you see the uprising, if you like, from both sides of the scale. Sorry, from both sides of the conflict. So that's Last of the Magi. The next level, so that was the micro level of that story, that book. The macro level, for those who are bigger fans of epic fantasy, because epic fantasies are always huge. The way I describe that is, I think I talked about hard magic systems last time I was here with you. So the idea that this is a magic fantasy story, but it's got a hard magic system. So all the magic that's in it is not just a Deus Ex Machina that, you know, someone waves a wand and the conflict is over, or the challenge is overcome. The magic has structure, it has rules, and it has cause and effect. That plays into the story to some extent. So the limits and the effect of magic, capital M magic, and the limits and the effect of arcana, capital A arcana, are explored in this. But over the series of the Symphony of Magics, there are 8 different schools of magic that are incrementally explored over the books to explain the cause, the effect, the limits, the purpose, and what can be done and what can't be done with them and why. So there's a bigger, slower, drawn-out story of what is the Symphony of Magics, where has it come from, what is the point of it. Then there's the meta level, which I don't really talk about very often because it's for those who just like to read a book and finish it and put it away. It's not really going to be explored, but it's hinted at on the very first page inside the cover there. There is a much, much bigger story at play about... Actually, I'll go through it in just a little bit more detail because I quite like exploring it. It's a bit of an ambitious project. This I came up with when I was 2012 when I was in a lecture at university. I've got this idea of, imagine this group of, I'll say gods just to keep it simple, but these higher beings that have the ability to create universes and create realities from nothing. And out of boredom, a group of these beings all decide, let's see who can create the perfect universe, the perfect, harmonious, in balance world. And each of them agree some core principles that we'll have planets and solar systems, we'll have matter, we'll have human life or life in general, and consciousness and spirit and stuff like that. But otherwise, in terms of how the worlds and the universes will regulate themselves, each of us will come up with our own design. And the symphony is this universe's playing out of that game. It's the great contest. All these gods all playing with their own little micro universes, going, which one of us can create a system that's perfect? And in every single system, there's always a problem. And that is explored over the totality of the series. But the fun thing about that as an idea is if you take things like Lord of the Rings, if you take Brandon Sanderson, his Mistborn trilogy, for example, quite often, with those particular examples, behind the scenes, there's always some issue over a creator deity or something that's going wrong in the world and the design of the world that's causing the conflict. What I've done, which is probably a little bit arrogant, but I think it's quite fun, is I've tried to take ownership of why is that a common thread across almost all epic fantasy. And that's what I'm exploring. So in a way, I forget what it is in Lord of the Rings, Iluvatar, I think, is the larger scale god, and then in the Mistborn trilogy, I forget what it is now, Ruin and Preservation are the two that I can remember. I think there is one higher than that, but I forget. My idea now is all these higher beings that feature in epic fantasy are all part of this same contest that I'm eventually going to write up. I'm not saying that I'm claiming their stories, but I'm trying to fit other fantasy universes lightly into my framework, which means I've got a science fiction series that I'm working on as well, and a couple of others that are very much in the early days, but they're all going to have a similar meta thread that links them all together, even though the genre and the worlds are so wildly different. But they all have a hard magic system, and they share that kind of common theme, and I love it. It brings me so much joy.
So
That was long.
explain to me again. No, it's grand. Explain to me again this hard magic system.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll give you the example of a soft magic system first of all. So if you take something like Harry Potter is probably a good example. In your Harry Potter books, you've got,
which I love, by the way. I won't hear a word against them.
No, I'm not gonna badmouth it. In the Harry Potter stories, the plot and the storyline is fundamentally about kids trying to overcome a larger scale plot that's going on in the background of the storyline, but fundamentally they're doing it in human ways often. And the magic and the spells is the flavour that gives it the fantasy. The spells don't generally have, you know, a bigger lore behind them. You wouldn't know a great deal about, well, where does that magic come from? What gave birth to it, and how does it all work? It doesn't really matter. You just enjoy it. Same with Lord of the Rings. There's quite a few instances where, you know, the famous scene in the Lord of the Rings films that everyone knows of Gandalf stood in front of the Balrog and slamming his staff down, "You shall not pass," creates a barrier, shockwaves that knocks the Balrog back. No one questions how that magic works. It's just, we did a spell and it was fun and I loved it. In hard magic, it's very different in the sense that the magic can kind of be part of the plot as well, because it's the fact that the magic has rules or structures and limitations in particular is usually the big feature. There's limitations to the magic, which means that what the characters can and can't do is an important part of the journey of the story. So to give you a little tease, Arcana in this story is explored as being able to pull upon the elements. So fire, water, wind, all of that stuff. And the Arcana users use that as their weapon. So anything they can see that is a natural part of the world, they draw upon it, they control it, and they do whatever they want with it. But over time, this is teasing a little bit more in this one, but someone else in the story is trying to work out why it is that every time someone uses Arcana, over a period of time thereafter, the area that they use that Arcana starts to decay. Or if they used fire, the best example that I like to use is if they took an open flame and manipulated it and used it, the flame would die out quite quickly while they used it. Or if they manipulated water, fresh water, the water would stale or even become stagnant. If they manipulated wind, storm clouds would start to emerge. And it's the question of, well, why is it that when I use that magic, there is that effect? Same with magic in this. When people talk about the magi, the titular magi here, and their capital M magic, people say that they had the ability to enhance the natural world, to make it more vibrant, more fruitful. But then at the same time, the first line of this story is, there was a reason the magi did not intervene. And that's a theme throughout the book. Yes, the magi could do all these wonderful things, but they very rarely did it. They didn't go around flashing magic like they were just, a parlor magician. There's a reason why they don't do it very often. So there's limits, there's rules that influence what the magic can and can't do. And as the stories progress, there are interactions between these different schools of magic too. And some of them are similar to each other, some are diametrically opposed to each other, and it's how they interact that starts to explore the wider system. And it's coming up with that system, and I'll give you you probably won't be able to see it very clearly on here, but there's a mostly blurred out diagram of the symphony just there in front of the cover that only has revealed the magic part of the secret so far. But in each of those books, I'm going to be fading in another eighth of that diagram until eventually you see what it is that brings all of these different magic systems together. But that's...
And will it make sense?
Yes, well, I hope so. I hope so. But the idea is, by the time you get to the end of the series...
I'm reading your book. This is nuts.
By the time you get to the end of the series, the thing that is attractive for people who enjoy hard magic, the thing that people tend to like about it, is by the time you get to the end of a series, you know the plot, you know the characters, you know the story, but also you fundamentally know pretty much everything you needed to know about what that magic was, how it worked, what the rules were, and why it was significant to the world. And usually by the end of a series like that, the magic system itself becomes the key part of the plot. Something's gone wrong with it, or it's reaching some kind of apotheosis where everything's falling apart, or it's becoming a cataclysmic event, which is just exploring that to its completion. But what I'm trying to do with this is explore that long game. But whereas if you take something like Wheel of Time, for example, which is 11, 12, 13 books, which explores a really long fantasy campaign, I'm doing this in duologies, so it's always paired, so you can enjoy the chunky epic fantasy, but the story is delivered in pairs. But the bigger symphony of magic and the hard magic system is explored over 8.
Mm-hmm.
So at least then you can jump on and jump off if you wanted to. You don't have to commit to the full 8. You don't even need to commit to all 8 in that scenario. You could commit to just 2. But if you want the bigger picture, then you'd need all 8.
So this is all happening in a fantasy world.
Yes.
But what messages, if any, would you like? It's like somebody reads just this one, say. What message would you like them to take from this into the real world?
That's a really good question. It's funny that as you were saying that, I was thinking, oh my God, what am I going to say? But then quickly it started to form because I've had so much time with this. There's a few. One of them actually links to what we've said today. How about that? Which is not actually planned, but one of them is kind of about freedom of expression, but from a political perspective.
Mm-hmm.
The conflict of ideology and how a failure to communicate and express different viewpoints on politics has caused a giant rift. The grand city of Elheim and Arcana becoming the dominant oppressive force in the country because there was no dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, a big feature of this story is that in this country there's 4 major kind of city-states. No, is it 4? I've forgotten now. 3? 4? Yeah, no, sorry. Yeah, 4. 4 major city-states. And then there's a collection of smaller kind of hamlets that function together. But the point is, the 4 city-states and then the counties on one side of the country are all independent. They all respect each other's boundaries. They all do their own thing. They work together harmoniously, but they're all inward-looking. The grand city of Elheim is on the other end of the spectrum, and they say, no, we are weak because we're fragmented. We need to unite as one so that we can all work together properly and defend each other, and etc., etc. But of course, on one side of the fence, that looks like oppression. That looks like dictatorship.
Mm-hmm.
On the other side, it looks like protection and safety and development and the pooling of resources. So the importance of seeing both sides of the political ideology is one thing that I wanted to get across with this. Another one is about identity and understanding your values and understanding understanding what your values are and what's important to you so you can pursue them properly and not get caught up in the whirlwind of your environment and forced down a path that's not right for you, which is mostly Darius's perspective. He's going through the career path and the life journey of someone that should be going... He's going down the career path and the life journey of what everyone else around him is doing because society tells him that's great, that's what's good. But he slowly has to realise that's not right for him. That's not his journey. That's not his life. It's just the life he's been forced into. And equally from the other character's perspective, Tharian has been living a pretty muted life where he just detaches from all of society and he has to learn the value of connection and actually opening himself up to other people and not being so insular, which makes Marla in the middle quite fun because she has ambition, she has drive, she's open to people. And even though she's not as pivotal to the overall plot conflict as much, she shows in the middle someone who's got it right. She knows what she's doing.
Mm-hmm.
She's switched on and she's achieving and doing really well because she is not closing herself off to the world. She's pursuing her goals. And I think everyone who interacts with her through the story realizes actually she's got it made. She knows what she's doing. And that's quite helpful for the other characters to realize what they're not doing right in their life. So those are my 2 things. The conflict of political ideology and understanding the benefits and the strengths of being more liberal and independent and focusing on individual rights and liberties, but on the other side also recognizing the values of a more conservative approach at the same time, and perhaps a more forceful approach, but being able to see that both sides have merits. And it's when you take them and put them so far apart from each other that conflict happens in the middle, because they won't talk to each other. And then the identity stuff as well. Those are my two themes in this one.
Will those themes broadly carry on through the other books? Or are there other messages you're trying to communicate?
There's definitely other messages. The second book is the second in the duology of this. So the second book, which I've already got in the pipeline, is Decay of Arcana. And every title has two meanings, which I'm quite proud of. I'm not going to tell you what this one is. I mean, the Last of the Magi, the first meaning is the plot. The Last of the Magi is out there somewhere. But there's also another meaning that links to the magic of capital M magic, the Magi magic. Like just like with the second book, as you might expect, the title Decay of Arcana hints at the Arcana Society, the Elheim, finally being defeated. It hints at that. But as I hinted at before, in relation to this one, there's stuff about Arcana as the magic, which is going to be revealed. The kind of the properties of that magic are going to be revealed in more detail, and that's what the Decay of Arcana is about. The third book, which is A Touch of Divinity, is more about faith, the strength of faith, but also the potential to be blinded by it. So faith and individual resilience is the main theme in the third one. But that one's still early days, so I'm not quite sure where to go with that one. But I know faith is going to be an absolutely critical one, because that book is going to explore divinity as a magic system and what that means and what that adds to this world, which is my favourite so far. It's a very different magic to what features in these first two.
So when can we buy a copy?
So depending on when this goes out,
when did this?
Yes, this
Sunday.
This Sunday. So the ebook is already available for pre-order on Amazon now. I've got some pre-orders already coming through, which is quite exciting. Terrifying at the same time. The physical copies and the release of the ebook will all go live on the 1st of May, which I think is a Wednesday. I thought it was a Saturday, but it's a Wednesday, which is a strange day. But there we go. It's Wednesday, the 1st of May. I've got a couple of very final touch-ups to do to the manuscripts, which are ready to just go to print for the physical copies. The physical copies can't be pre-ordered, but they will all just go live on the 1st. It's on a print on demand service, so they'll only print when it's bought.
Perfect.
But it's been really fun putting that together. I never thought I'd be able to do it.
Congratulations, my man.
Thank you. It's really fun. I
love the picture. It's so cool.
It is a cool one.
And I love his outfit.
It's all right, isn't it?
Yeah, I want this outfit.
The green coat has been a staple for Tharian's look since I first came up with it when I think I was 15.
It's just the collar under his hood is perfect. It's just a really good outfit.
I love it. I mean, I first came up with the...
It's time to bring back a cape, I reckon.
I think I'm ready for it. I'm ready for that. I've noticed in my fiction writing that I routinely give people capes.
It's the collar underneath the cape. It's really finishing off the look.
I need to visualize it now. I can't remember.
Yeah, it's the collar underneath the cape. It's perfect.
Oh yeah. I see.
I like that. I want that. I need that. You know, the high collar. It's just lovely. It's a really good looking book.
It's very pretty. I'm very proud of it because, you know, I'm doing it self-published because I had a go at the traditional publishing route, and I really, to be honest, I felt incredibly demoralized by it. Because like I said before, I might have said it last time I was on, but if you pursue traditional publishing, you put out feelers, you do query letters with sample chapters and a synopsis that is the full spoiler version of your story on one page. But, you know, you have to really boil down your entire concept into very short phrases. So the stuff that I've just talked through, I only really told the first version to the story of Tharian, Marla, and Darius. That's all I give the publishers. I cut all the other stuff out because it's too much to put into a query letter. But you put all of that in, and you spend a lot of time targeting very specific agents who you think, I'm not being an idiot. I'm going to target the people who like this kind of stuff or who want this kind of stuff. And you fire off this stuff to them. And to put it bluntly, the majority of them, they'll say they'll respond within 12 weeks, and the majority of them just don't even respond, which is really sad because, if you think about any other industry, if you imagine us in legal practice, if we've got big cases on, which take up all of our time, and then we get an inquiry come through and we say, well, we'll get back to you within 12 weeks, or not at all, we would be absolutely on the firing line for that, quite rightly. But in this industry, sadly, that's the norm. And it does seem that traditional publishing, that's probably unfair for me to say because obviously I've had the bad experience, but traditional publishing seems to get more excited about people who have brands and have small, tiny books that can be churned out quite quickly and sold en masse, and then we move on. It does feel like being an entry-level player for this type of thing, particularly that type of thing, the chunk of it, it's just not profitable immediately in the eyes of the agents, it seems. And even just trying to get a phone call conversation or an email exchange with some of these people is impossible. And that's really hard when you put so much work into it. As I say, I spent about 18 months working on querying and refining and improving. And when you're not getting even a sentence back to suggest what was wrong, and sometimes you're getting nothing back at all, it's really hard. And there was a good 5 or 6 months where I thought I might just delete it all, chuck all of that away, and just kill it off and never do it again because I'm clearly rubbish at it. That was where I got to, headspace. But then
well done for persevering.
Yeah.
But the Interview with the Vampire Lady, whatever her name is, I can't remember her name now.
Sorry?
Interview with the Vampire. Her book, didn't she self-publish the first book? She just got either rejected or ignored. Published the first Interview with the Vampire.
I don't know that one.
Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise, I think.
Oh. Well, I mean, you could say the same thing about 50 Shades. 50 Shades was a self-published book. It was fan fiction, if I remember right, actually, when it started, and then someone just picked it up. So yeah, it's not all dead in the water.
And Roald Dahl, didn't he wallpaper his house with rejection letters?
Probably, and J.K. also had many rejections. And I'm not saying it's completely game over, because there was someone else actually who's just joined the fantasy scene, but the kind of cozy light fantasy scene, who self-published and then immediately got snapped up, but partly because they have a very established online brand for other things. So it's not over, but I think the thing that I've learned from doing this is the moment I put all of my hope in something like that, and I put my love in someone else's hands and I get nothing, that destroyed the love of it for me. But now I'm back to a place where I will just happily, most nights, just write some nonsense. Some absolute magical nonsense. And it's not the best, being honest about it, it's not going to be the best thing anyone's ever written. And it's probably...
That's your opinion. Let me decide.
Well, fine. Yeah, I mean, my goal with this project is if one person buys it, reads it, and says, I really like that, I'm really looking forward to the second one, I've won. It's not about money. It's not about fame or anything. I just want someone to enjoy the nonsense that comes out of my head, particularly if it's someone that likes the long game of the ambitious.
It's going to be great.
Are you reading the little précis there?
No world is perfect. No design is without flaw. The least we can ever hope for is a state of equilibrium, balance. So apt it is that my design became known as the symphony, for it is rife with logic and order, pattern and rhythm. In moments, harmony most resplendent. In others, dissonance most tumultuous. Nestled between pauses, so pregnant with anticipation. This is going to be great. This is great.
That was a very late edition, that front page, but that's the meta big long game. That stuff at the beginning. The rest of it, what I would say is, as a final word on it, is even though what you've just read is really the high end of the fantasy stuff, like that's world design, cosmology stuff that's hinted at the first page, the story of that book is much more down to earth. It's not that heavy on the fantasy content. It's going to come slowly over time. It's Tharian doing his thing, Marla starting her new life in a new city, Dara struggling with his identity in his society. That's the core of it. Yeah, it's a lot easier to do that, the self-publishing stuff. That's been the big, regardless of whether or not anyone buys it, and I say that even though I know I've got some sales already in the pipeline. Just proving that I could do that has been so much fun. So much fun. And seeing that, and it actually looks pretty decent, has been stunning. Like the earlier copy that I've got in my bag, the front cover looks awful. It's so blurry. And I was like, how am I going to figure that out? How am I going to fix that? And how am I going to make sure that each page sits where it fills the space on the page? Because that isn't a system that does that for you. You've got to figure out how to do all of that.
What do you mean?
I had to format the document that then gets printed to look like that to make sure that it makes the full use of the page.
So where's the you didn't have editors involved? You are the editors. You're the beginning, middle, and end of this.
I had 4 beta readers who were friends who volunteered to read it and give me their thoughts. And to be fair, lots of things got changed. The chapters were about 3 times as long before beta readers got hold of it and basically said, I can't be bothered to read that chapter, it's too long. Pointed out inconsistencies of characters. My dad is sending me right now the last typos that he's found in that manuscript, so I'm dreading it because I've got 2 days to make the changes. But that's what I mean. It won't be perfect like you'd expect from a book on a shelf. But if you go into it thinking this is a self-published book, it's been done entirely by me, no professional editor. But I'd say if you just like the joy and the ride of fantasy, and you're willing to look past some of the blemishes along the way, I think people will hopefully enjoy it. But if you're looking for diamond quality, precise writing with no errors at all, then I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint on that one, because that's the game when you've got a 204,000 word novel that you had to edit yourself. You go blind to reading your own mistakes. But it's just enjoy the journey of it. That's all I want.
Well, I can't wait. I'm going to put my order in on the 1st of May.
It's more expensive than I would like.
How much is it?
$12.99, which is pretty much what you buy for a book of that kind of size. It's quite normal from Waterstones.
That's reasonable.
But the reality is, because it's print on demand, I have to pay the production cost for each print, which is fair, because then I don't have to buy them en masse at any stage. Whereas, so from a royalty perspective, the ebook is so much more lucrative. So I feel a bit bad because the price is pretty much as low as I can get it for print, because I'm not interested in making money from it. It's just fun for me. But if it's hopefully not too unbearable as a price point, then I think you get a good chunk of book there for the price. Because most books are 90,000 words. Mine's almost 2.5 times that size. So you get a lot of words. A lot of words.
I can't wait. I really can't wait. Yeah.
You should write a book. Write a book. Write a book. You've got so much wisdom.
That's very kind of you to say.
You do, though.
Cheers, man. Yeah, I would like to one day.
And if you need help with converting it into a print book, I can make that happen. I know how to do it. Look, you've got it. I know how to do that now. I'm unstoppable now.
All right, maybe I will write a book then.
Don't write one that big.
I don't think I could. I mean, that takes some real dedication.
Yeah. The second one is about the same size.
12 years. How long has this been in your... How long has you been cooking this up?
That story has been in my head since...
Dedication to your daddy?
My dad's in there, yeah.
You said... to Dad for being a fan of even the most poorly written draft, reaching as far back as my first attempts at story writing some 15 years ago. Ah, fair enough.
I started writing when I was 15, and I wrote a sci-fi book, and it was awful. And my dad read it and he just sung its praises from cover to cover.
Oh.
And he helped me get published through a process that I now am not happy with. And I don't like to talk about it much, but I'm glad I went through it.
Why don't you like to talk about it?
Because, but putting it honestly, for those who have interest in the publishing process, there's different types of publishers. You've got traditional publishers, you've got self-publishing, print-on-demand publishers on the other end, which is kind of this, but I'm not using any publisher in terms of editing services. There's no exchange of money other than Amazon taking its share for printing it and stuff. But in the middle, you've got what for a while was called vanity publishing, which is, these publishing houses that you send them manuscript and they'll say, we'll review it and tell you if we think it's got potential. And putting it really bluntly, they'd respond to pretty much everybody and say, we've read it, we loved it, we want to make it into a massive thing. But if you pay us this money, we'll edit it, we'll get a cover for it, we'll get it printed out, and there you go. So it's, we'll share a part of the risk. But the reality is, for the majority of people who go through that, the house always wins. I mean, which is true with publishing generally, but the house always wins and the author almost always loses.
Meaning what?
You've had to pay hundreds or a couple of £1,000s to go through the process, and the royalties you get back over the next few years are 20 quid. But the publishers won. Because their costs were just, we need to edit that, make a cover, and then it won't get printed unless it's bought. So, and you don't get the marketing force behind it. Whereas in a traditional publisher, if they really like the book and they really think it's going to work, they will offer you in advance. They'll say, we'll buy that from you. Here's a lump sum. We're going to make it amazing.
And we've got the relationships with the distributors and
you're going to get a royalty from it too. So we all win. And the publisher has a really vested interest in pushing it. So I was in that middle category, but I didn't know that because I was a kid. I thought I'd been offered something amazing. So I had a sci-fi book called Unison out, and didn't really make anything from it at all. Always feel a bit bad about it because it would cost more than it made, and I didn't realise that I'd put my name on a book that had gone through that, and then I've kind of, for any agent or publisher that might look up my name when considering a new manuscript, if they were to do that, they'd see, oh, you've already failed at one project. But I've done that now, and that's there. And there was talk of, should I query this under a new name? I thought, do you know what? No.
don't mess with history.
Yeah,
Let the story unfold as it unfolds.
It's so important, because if anyone ever talks to me about my old book, I love saying it's garbage. Do not read it. Do not read it, because I don't read it. I hate it. But I've still got a copy of it on my shelf because I did that. I was 15, 16, and I wrote a 60,000 word sci-fi story. And that taught me so much about doing this better, which has been really valuable. You can't overlook the mistakes and kick yourself too much for the mistakes you make along the way. So this has been really fun to actually turn that negative into a positive and say, that's what I did when I was 15, and this is what I've done at 31. And the journey has been really fun. But yeah, I started when I was 15. I actually started with that story. The first, one of the first chapters, I can't remember whether it's 1, 2, or 3 now. I wrote that when I was 15. Just a few pages, and I thought that was fun, and then saved it, and then I came back to it when I was 26, I want to say, and looked at it and thought, I don't really enjoy sci-fi that much in terms of writing it. As much as I have done it, I didn't enjoy it as much as I liked. I'm going to come back to that, and then a couple of years later, that few hundred words on a Word document that I'd had saved away from 2005, suddenly became, 2009, something like that. I forget the year. I can't do maths right now. That became The Last of the Magi, but along the way became The Symphony of Magics. And then along the way of that became a hard magic system, which I've got a document that sits behind this, which is the Bible, which has every character everything they've done, every relationship they have, every description of the magic system and what it can do and what it can't do, all documented in a something like a 30,000 word.
This is your nerd defense.
It's my nerd defense.
You know this.
You do need it.
Someone's going to read this and go, hold on a minute. You can't. How come you taken water from there and it didn't come away from? Hold on a minute.
You said this happens.
Your magic system doesn't work correctly. Oh, you're gonna end up going to one of these nerd fests, Comic-Con or whatever it is. You're going to be there signing autographs.
I don't think that's going to be.
Why?
I'd love it. That'd be really cool.
I'm going to dress as this guy and come along.
That would be an absolute dream, but at the same
Come on,
time,
it's going to be great.
I love the idea. Like, it may seem a bit silly, but I'd love the idea of taking that off, and if people loved that story, that system, and the journey of it, and I was hidden somewhere, and I probably should have used a different name, and it just became something that people liked, and I hid away from it. That would probably be my ideal. But seeing as I put so much work into it, my name's on it, and I'm going to be proud of it. There'll be some mistakes in there, as my dad has spotted today, which I'm going to fix. But do you know what? I'm one person. That's quite a big job to do for one person. I didn't do the cover design. I've got an amazing German lady that helps me with the designs. And quite a few people have now contributed to making that the way it is. Even the artwork inside, that's a very recent thing that I've had made up, which I never knew how I would make that happen, how I'd put into art form something I had in my head. And when it was done, it's the first time in a long time that I've actually cried at something, that I saw the artwork come through and I was just like, oh my God, that's miles beyond what I can do. Because I can write and visualize. I can visualize and communicate in writing what's in my head, I think, reasonably well. But I could never physically make it. That's why I like writing, because there's no limitations. I can write whatever is in my head. But if you ask me to get some paints and try to visualize a scene from my book, it'll just be bleh.
So does this look like Tharian to you? Are you happy with Tharian?
Well, the funny thing about Tharian is yes and no. I got the artwork done up very early on as something to keep me going while I was writing, but it's really stuck with me, particularly the colours and the general structure of his design. But a bit like an author that I used to read a lot when I was young, Meg Rossoff, I don't put too much effort into describing the physical features of my characters in terms of their physical features, their race. I might do hair colour sometimes, but I don't do much more unless they're really striking, because I think it's important. I really liked what Meg Rossoff said to me when I was about 13, in that if you keep the characters a little bit more blank slate, the descriptions of their personality and the way they behave the reader will start to create what that character looks like. So yes and no. I mean, the eye colour I think on the cover is kind of yellow. I'm not sure where that came from, but I kind of think it looks cool. So I'm sticking with it. I don't know if I describe Tharian's eye colour. I must do. It'll be in my Bible if I have ever described his eye colour. But generally, yeah.
So you give the personality description to the artist and say, for your books?
Not for the artist, because to be fair, the way I've done the art, they use what they've got, to be fair. Though I did, perhaps controversially, for the second one, I did put a description of my character, who's the front cover feature for number 2, which is Darius. I put a full description of him into one of the AI tools, and the artwork it created, I was like, that's him. That's just made him perfectly. Whereas I did get the same artist to create the second cover for me, and she basically had to use some royalty-free images and tamper with them, which is what she's done here, because the original colours on that are completely different. So someone might have seen this image before, to be fair, but it's royalty-free. The Darius one kind of looks like him, but it's clear that there's been lots of colour tampering, and it makes him look a bit weird. Whereas the AI one that I had generated, which is a unique thing, and it's mine, that is pretty much exactly what I described. I've done that with a few other characters because I've done
That's
so
fantastic.
much description work.
So then can you not send that what you create
Yeah, I'm
then
gonna send it
to her,
Well,
and then
I've
she
bought
can zhuzh it up?
Yeah, I've bought the file off her so that I can try and do it myself. Because the second cover is more or less the same as this one. Just the feature color is a strong royal blue. That's going to be a theme with each book. There's a prominent singular color. So I'm going to try it, and if not, when I invariably fail at that, I'm going to go back to her and say, "Can you please put this person? Can you put this Darius in, and get rid of the other one?" And that will be really fun. But this is the beauty of like the tools. I know AI art is controversial for various reasons, but you can do so much of this stuff now.
Fantastic.
I was thinking on the drive here.
AI.
Is it?
Yeah, I spent ages giving different prompts, playing with it.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Didn't it come out great though?
It comes out really well.
Yeah, I was really impressed with that. I mean, it takes a while for it to, because you say do this, and then you realize that I've not been clear enough with my prompt, or I've not.
Yeah.
And you're like, and by the time you're done with it, you're asking it to evoke an image, to evoke a feeling. Sorry.
Yeah.
I want it to feel like this, and that's what you're communicating. And then finally it goes, I know what you mean, clunk. And you're like,
absolutely,
he knows what I mean.
Well, it's a bit like with the Darius one. I think I've got about 35 Dariuses in my Dropbox folder until I eventually got to one where I thought, yes, that's captured the prompt, or my prompt has been properly communicated to get to where I want. And I was thinking on the way in, actually, when I was seeing my dad's messages, I was thinking, I wonder if I can quickly find an AI tool that can proofread and actually pick up on the sentences.
Of course you can, by the way.
Yeah, I know. I just don't know which one I would use.
How much can you stick into ChatGPT?
I don't know, but I imagine it's a limit.
I think you can probably dump the whole thing, or do it in sections. Just for typos. Just say just typos. Don't try and grammatically change it or touch it.
Well, typos aren't a problem. I don't think I have any typos anymore, but I do have some typos in the sense of I might have used, a homonym. Is it a homonym? Words that sound the same but are spelled differently? Yeah, I think that's right. I might have done that where I've written a word, I spelt it the wrong way, but I wouldn't notice it because as I'm reading it at the speed that I'll read it, I'll just glance over it and I'll correct it in my head to what it was meant to be. I want to see if it can read and go, hang on, that doesn't read right.
ChatGPT will clock that.
I hope so.
Yeah, it's a large language model.
I know.
It's the dad of you.
I know, but I just haven't tried it.
Yeah, do you play with it at all?
Yeah, I play with it all the time. I've got the app on my phone.
I love it so much.
It's so good.
Do you talk to it?
Yeah.
May I talk to it?
Right. When I was going through the querying process for sending stuff out to agents, I created a synopsis and I sent it to ChatGPT and said, can you read this and tell me what you think needs to be improved to make this more attractive to a literary agent? And it went, blah, 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 here it is. And I went, that makes complete sense. I changed it and in the same conversation sent it back and said, does that improve it? And it said, yes, it does. But we'd now suggest you do this. That was really funny because when it came back and said, we'd now suggest these improvements, one of the improvements it said was, you should avoid repetition because you've repeated this. I read it back and went, no, I haven't. I said,
there's a couple of things with ChatGPT and these AI models. One, it's not there yet.
Yeah, I know.
Right, but it does make a lot of mistakes, and it makes a lot of weird mistakes, like mathematical. Like, so I was asking it wasn't simple, but it was, to work out some tax thing before I was having a conversation with an accountant. So let me just, instead of asking the accountant, let me just ask you. So I asked it this question and it responded and I was like, well, I know that can't be right because it has to be something more than the number I've given you because I'm asking you to add a percent. I just don't know what the answer is. And then I was like, just put that back in. I said, try that again. And it kept coming out with it wrong. He said, oh, I realised the mistake I've made. This is, it's very, very polite. But it comes back with it. I'm like, that's still wrong. Right? And I'm like, okay, we did it about 3 or 4 times. And I said, stop doing the calculation. Tell me why you're making the mistake.
Yeah.
Right? And it still couldn't quite get there. And I was like, bless you. But there's something up. But no, I enjoy the conversations.
Yeah.
I must say, I enjoy the conversations because even though it can't quite do the creativity It's not funny. So it can't make a joke that's even close to one that you would share, right? It knows the beginning, middle, and end. And you're like, I mean, that's a dad joke, homie. You can't, you know? So it's like, it's not there from a creativity point of view. If you ask it to write a story, for example, a simple thing like that, like do a child's story. Even a child's story, it can't really do. It'll touch on the formula. You can see it doing something formulaic. But from a breadth point of view, boy, it's just a gift. It is a gift. And research, like from a starting point, from a research point of view,
so valuable.
It can touch. It will go all the way across and go. You want to consider this, and you're like, I only had 6 of those. You've got 12, and you're like, oh, this is wonderful. The breadth of it is just.
I've done so much with it. I mean, the thing about the conversation is when I was doing this back and forth over the synopsis, I found myself just having a conversation. When I corrected its mistake and it said, like with your one, sorry, I have made a mistake there. Here, I've corrected it. And we just went back and forth until eventually it said, yeah, you're done. And of course, I didn't take that as it's now therefore perfect, but we had a conversation. And I had another fun one where I do try and do more creative, abstract things. Because I think getting AI to do really abstract stuff quickly is so cool. So I play a particular video game where you play, it's kind of a shooter game, small scale shooter game, not like your Call of Duties where it's just people with crazy guns in war. They're very creative characters that all have very weird, unique skill sets. And I said to the AI, create a new character that fulfills this kind of role but doesn't have any of the abilities that the existing characters have. And within seconds, it created it, and it looked up the game and understood the format of the character and gave me what, to me as a player, looked like something that could feasibly be a character. And then I said, okay, now create a new one that would be a counter to that one, has the skill set that would be able to counter that one. And it did. It said, okay, following that model that I've just created, I've now created this one that would counter that one. I thought, that's taken seconds.
Yeah.
Absolute seconds. And it's harder to do that because the amount of data it has to go and look at, understand, and then present that information in a particular format. You know, it's not just writing paragraphs for me, it's writing particular things, giving things names, giving them descriptions, and then explaining the mechanics for each thing. I was thinking that has done something that takes a lot of time. It's so much easier doing it that way. And I've done it with multiple choice questions for quizzes as well. Just say, generate 20 multiple choice questions with 4 potential answers and highlight the correct one in each based on this topic. Go. And it's like, yeah, there you go, A, B, C, D. And you think, well, that's just done so much work for me. And you can do so much with it like that. I had another one recently where I asked it to teach me an Excel formula. I wanted to know how to do something in Excel I've never done before. I said, how can I make this happen? Having none of the knowledge to ask it, you know, how do I use this formula correctly? I said, what formula do I need and how do I use it? And it was like, yeah, this is what you need. Use equals this and do it in this way. And I'm now an Excel whiz because it knew exactly, brilliant. It understood from the context of the question what it was I was asking, and when that's the context-driven answer. Whereas, you know, put that into Google, and I've got to have at least some of the language understanding to ask it the correct question. In AI, it will understand where I'm being and it will fill in the gap for me and go, here, we've helped you. That's what you wanted. It's just amazing. I love it. I absolutely love it. Replace me with AI. I don't care. I'll get it to write my new book.
That can be the topic of our next conversation, if you like. The end of the human race. It's a pleasure to have you, bro. Thanks to everyone at 7 Studios for looking after us. It's been wonderful as always. All right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. It's been a pleasure, my man.
It's always fun.
Yeah.